I think you're afraid of heights. I'm like, what? How can I be afraid of heights?
I saw these 5 other people that I don't remember being at the accident. And as soon as they say that, I'm like, yes, it's working. That means that the trauma is starting to fade.
Bought that car knowing that my other car was going to be totaled. And I got in it and I went to pull out of the driveway of the dealership. And I was like, oh.
And we just healed. And after that weekend, we were great. And we were engaged 6 months later.
Hi, friends. Today I interviewed Laurel Wiers. What a fantastic conversation that we have. She works with people to help them eliminate their triggers so they can become the best versions of themselves. So we go through how she got into this work, the type of things she does to help people, and the impact she's having. I promise you, if you have any triggers in your life, this is an episode you do not want to miss. So enjoy. Okay, friends, today I have Laurel Wiers with us. She is amazing, a consultant, coach, therapist, author, speaker, blah, 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 blah. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Laurel, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you today. I love everything you do. I've really been looking forward to this, truly.
Yay, yay, yay. Okay, so you have built an entire business around helping people eliminate triggers to elevate their performance.
Yes, I have. It was not something that anyone expected me to do, especially myself. I've been a therapist for 23 years, and I probably spent the majority of my career running as far as I could from PTSD, truly, because I knew that what they taught us in graduate school was not enough. So I could have people that would come into my office and I would work with them and they would tell me what had happened. And I knew they might feel better momentarily, but I knew it wouldn't be a long-term thing. And so after a couple of years, I realized I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm going to send this out to people that really know what they're doing. But then what I found was that they really weren't getting that much better. So that it was kind of this big void for a while. And then I serendipitously ended up in a training program that taught me how to deal with trauma. And now I run towards it.
I love this. I love it. Yeah, because when people have PTSD, they go into an automated response. And then there's a lot of guilt or shame with saying man, I wish I would have acted differently or done differently. But it's so hard to have that pause show up for them where they can choose a different reaction.
Exactly. Yes. And what I learned was that it was even more than teaching people how to cope and how to respond in their trauma, but it was really pulling out the things that trigger them. And once I learned about the neuroscience behind memory and how we store memories, and then was trained how to retrain the brain, how to store memories, that's when the magic started to happen. I could go in and within 1 to 3 sessions, truly pull out triggers that people have been dealing with for many, many years. It was amazing.
And people don't necessarily know what their triggers are, do they? It's kind of a hard thing to pinpoint.
Right. They just know they feel anxious or they know they don't like certain sounds or certain places. Some people that have, I call it acute trauma, right, where it's been one thing, like a car accident. They have an easier time sometimes knowing, okay, this is why I'm anxious when I get in the car. But some people who have childhood trauma or trauma from relationships, that's where it gets a little more messy. That's where you have the people that they're reacting to their coworkers or in their friend groups or in relationships. And they're not quite sure why, when my partner raises his voice, even though they're not yelling at me, why they get all dysregulated.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was in a car wreck and it was horrific. I'm amazed that I'm still here and grateful for every moment. So thank you, universe. And it was interesting. I got in the car wreck and the insurance company's like, well, we're not sure if we totaled your car. I'm like, I promise you totaled my car. So you can wait till you decide if you totaled my car or not. There is not a way that this car is not totaled. Every airbag all the things, right? So I went down to the dealership and lucky, there was a car that was so close to the one that I was building and waiting for it to come. but it was like back in the day, like right around this COVID time. So all of a sudden you don't have parts to get all these pieces. And they didn't want the car. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to take this car. So I bought that car knowing that my other car was going to be totaled. And I got in it and I like went to pull out of the driveway of the dealership. And I was like, oh yeah, this is interesting. And I like had to sit with myself for 30 minutes in this parking lot being okay, I need, if I don't drive now, this is just going to get worse. Like I need to start driving. It's going to be okay. And I'm giving myself this pep talk and like I'm trying to find music that I like to put me in a different mood and all this stuff. And then finally I just said, okay, we're going. And I went and I had to drive 40 minutes home. And I got hit by a semi. So I passed some semi. The minute a semi was on the highway, my heart was racing. Like I did nothing different, but my heart was racing. And I would say for a solid 6 months, I drove down the highway with a racing heart anytime I was next to a semi. And then eventually, I don't know, you neutralize it out or you metabolize the fear. I don't really understand what happens, but I can drive now. But it gave me an idea of what trauma truly feels like when it gets stuck in your body. Because before it was a concept, now it's like, oh my goodness, this is a feeling that I can like put words around.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that most people struggle with, but they don't get the blessing you got. That is wonderful and amazing that within 6 months you worked your way through it. And some people can. And then the hard part is, like you said, we don't know what happened. We don't know if it was time or you just got used to things. And it's great when that blessing happens. The hard part is the people that come in my office that it doesn't ever go away. And they're like, I can't live this way anymore, Laurel. I work with a lot of car accidents, and they're like, I just want to drive my car without having a panic attack.
I believe it. I believe it. Even this is funny too. Like another story is so I, set out to set this world record in rock climb or mountaineering. And one of the mountains required rock climbing. And I'm like, okay, I should, I'll get into rock climbing so I can train for this mountain. And so I went out with a coach the first day and I started climbing up the wall. And around 10 feet, I got white. I started shaking. I thought I was gonna like. I was like, "Oh my goodness!" And I came back down. And I was exhausted, and I told my coach, "I'm like, what just happened?" He goes, "I think you're afraid of heights." I'm like, "What? How can I be afraid of heights? I've been on chairlifts. I can walk those silly things at like skyscrapers. Like, what are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, I've seen it before, and that kind of looks like a fear of heights." And I'm like, oh my goodness, I just told the whole world that I was going to go for this record and I'm afraid of heights. This is unbelievable. He's like, don't worry, we can get through it. I'm like, yeah, right. I'm going to pee my pants if I have to go back up there. Like, seriously. And so it was funny. He goes, listen, you just need to go one handhold higher. So we went one handhold higher a couple times that session. I went home. I slept, I swear to God, like 12 hours. It wasn't physically exhausting. It was this mental exhaustion that I had no idea. Then I came back. We went for 5 days in a row because he's like, listen, we need to go as many times as possible and do this as much as possible. And I found out that after the third day, once I got to 30 feet, I didn't have a fear of heights anymore. Now everything was so tiny that I had this like barrier. And then after the fifth day, I could go and I could taste it in my mouth. Like there was a taste in my mouth, but I was able to work through it. And I know that if I'm going to go climb, I need to spend a few days getting past that fear again because it grows when I haven't done it.
Wow. That fascinates me so much because it mixes a couple things that I know to be true, which is exposure therapy, right? Was kind of the standard back in the day before all the brain science was understood. And that's in a sense, right, what he had you do. Let's do little pieces. We'll keep exposing you to it. And then eventually you'll be okay. And then what I love about that is you did it, but it didn't stick because now you have to like redo it every time. So that tells me that there hasn't been that complete pull of that trigger in your brain because something still lives there, right? That is getting hit every time you go back to it. super fascinating though.
Yeah, it is. So so I know like if I'm going to go ice climbing, I should go to the gym a couple times before, and then I'll still feel a little like woo woo, and then I'll get out there and I'm like, okay, I'm fine. But if it's been months, then that fear, and it's funny, it's 10 feet to 30 feet. At before 10 feet, it's fine. After 30 feet, it's fine. And it's just that little threshold of, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Don't look down. What you climb with your feet. If you're a good climber, you climb with your feet. So you're always looking down to see where you place your feet and then you place your hands. It's interesting. But these are minor triggers. These are like things that I put myself into. They're not these emotionally life sucking, stunting, different levels of triggers.
Still so important though, because the people that I work with, it runs the whole gamut of what you just talked about, right? So I have my first responders and I've got people that have been through horrific things. But then on the other end, I do have the people that it's sports performance, right? It's a gymnast who falls off the beam and now she has a meet next week and she can't get on because all she can remember is falling off of the beam. So regardless of how we get them, they do the same thing. They paralyze us or they make us not trust ourselves. So, yeah, but they're all the same, but different.
Yeah, and is that the same because our brain, like you said, I think I've read stuff, and I don't know if this is true or not, but when we have memories, it doesn't store it like in a folder of saying like, okay, here's this exact memory and here's all the pieces of it. It kind of stores like pieces of it in different sections, which is why later when things a smell might trigger you or a sound might trigger you or whatever, even though it didn't, because it was a piece of the entire original.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly how memories are. Yeah, it's all the different parts of our brain that store the different pieces. That's why sometimes you could see something and it doesn't trigger you. But like you said, you smell it or you taste it, and then that becomes the triggering thing. But the great thing about that is what allows us to change the way that the brain stores it. Because it's different, every time you recall a memory, you're actually synthesizing new proteins in your brain. So the memory that you put back after you've recalled it is not the same memory that it was before you recalled it. So it makes it fragile. So when that happens, we can actually go in and change the images and the sensations that are associated with your memory. And if we can change that and make it positive, then the trigger goes away. We always can keep the story, right? If you think about it, when you tell someone, I got in a car accident, that's not what bothers them. It's that image and the way that they feel and where it's stored in their body. That's what's tripping them up. So we can take those parts and we can actually make them more positive and then put it back so it neutralizes everything. So then they just have what they always remember to be the facts, but we've now changed the way that their brain remembers it so that they no longer are triggered by stimuli in the environment.
I like how you say that because I think sometimes people maybe not don't want to rewrite the story into a positive, right? It could be a terrible thing that happened. And so you're allowing that truth to exist, but allowing your body to have a different reaction. So it doesn't change the truth, but it just changes how you can respond to things in the future.
Yes, and that's the beauty of it because a lot of people will say, I don't want to forget because it did make me who I am. And I will say, yeah, you're not going to forget that. At the end of this session, you will be able to recount to me the entire event. But the difference is, it doesn't own you anymore. It won't make you feel like crying. You won't feel your heart start to beat because you have changed the way your brain sees it and the way your body feels it, and that is where the relief comes from.
Yeah. Okay, so the technique that you use is pat triggers?
It's called accelerated resolution therapy.
Accelerated resolution therapy. Okay. And so is it always in person or can you do it over Zoom or how does that work?
I can do it both ways. So the only thing that the person has to be able to do when I do it over Zoom is I use bilateral stimulation, meaning I want to have their eyes move back and forth.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Rapid eye movement stuff. I've heard about this. Yes.
You got it. So yeah, it's very similar to EMDR, which many people have heard about. The difference is it works quicker and it's more straightforward than EMDR. So we're doing the same thing. We're revisiting the memory while we're moving the eyes back and forth, or tactile. We can have like these vibrators that you put in people's hands and they cause a vibration. So it goes back and forth like that. And then they recall the memory. And then we can do the protocol while we do that piece as well.
How do they access the memory?
So they watch it in their mind's eye while their eyes are going back and forth. So, for example, if you think about a birthday party, right, you could move your eyes back and forth and remember while you're moving your eyes back and forth the birthday party you went to yesterday. So, with trauma, people always have a movie, we call it, right? So, if I say to you the car accident, you remember exactly the certain snippets that just come up. So that's what I have people watch while we're either moving their eyes or tapping on them. And that's the process that allows us access to then go in and change the images and sensations that are with that memory. And all that works good online unless there's somebody that can't move their eyes and then remember the movie. Some people with ADD, that's a little more difficult, or some people just have a hard time. So when that happens, I just have them come in person to see me, and that way I can tap them or I can put something in their hands to make them do it.
Okay. And what happens if they can't remember the thing?
So if there's a sensation in your body, you can work with that if they can't see it. So sometimes, for example, I'll have someone who had abuse as a child and they don't recall it whatsoever. So, but they have a feeling in their body that they know is tied to it. And so you can even metaphorically work that way sometimes. You can say, tell me, when you think about that feeling in your body, what do you see? So like people that feel trapped, sometimes they'll say, I see myself in a room and like being suffocated and these walls coming in. I can actually do the protocol with that metaphor. It's crazy wild, and it still can bring relief to them.
Really?
Yes. So, you know, what's fascinating on that too is that our brain really is making up stories a lot. So, whether it's a metaphor, right, that's going to represent the feeling, I can even do this protocol for dreams. So, some people have repetitive dreams that they symbolize something in their life. You can do the protocol with that and they'll stop having that dream. Because, in a way, your brain, right, when it's dreaming, it's trying to put to rest this thing that's happened. So if you're anxious about something, your brain's always trying to work it out. It wants to take that memory and put it back in your brain so it's neutralized, but it can't land the ship. So it's showing it to you every night when you're going to sleep, trying to make it better. So I can say to people, tell me that recurring dream, and that's what they watch. And then that's how we can process out all the negative that's with it. It's really cool.
That is really interesting. And, you know, I'm thinking of what age does this like start to work for people?
That's a good question. So there's other people that do this method, and some of them work with children younger than the ages I work with. I personally have found through the years I've been doing it, I'm comfortable at about 10. I feel like at like 8, 10, I know that they're following me and that they're following the instructions and that they're not just maybe people pleasing the adult to do what they're supposed to. However, I stood corrected this year. I did somebody who was 7 or 8. And I put the disclaimer out there and said, I'm not sure how this is going to go, but I am totally game to try. And she was a super mature 7, 8-year-old, and it worked fabulously. She was struggling with the death of her dog, and she had become withdrawn. She was sleeping with her parents every night. She was crying often about the dog. Like her whole personality started to change. And so I said, well, it sounds like she's really traumatized by this loss. So let's see if we can't do something with that. And we did. And since then, the mom has told me that night, she said she no longer slept in the bed. She can talk about the dog all the time and smile now. And she goes to the grave of the dog and she's happy. So it's amazing what it does when you can relieve those intense sensations that are tied to it.
Yeah. I'm thinking like it's been an interesting journey with you know, I have 7 kids, right? So as a mom, you sit and you watch and you kind of see how things happen. And I've seen traumas happen from bullying or lack of self-confidence and some of these things where they give away their power to somebody else. And you wonder as a parent, how often do you let that work itself out? Or when do you say, hey, it's time to do an intervention? And coming to like full disclosure here, I am not sure I'm a huge fan of talk therapy. I've done it myself for many years. I feel I've done other methodologies that have given me much better results because it's like I'm just rewriting the same. I don't know. It just hasn't worked for me as much as I'd like. So I've been very sensitive to putting my kids into talk therapy because I feel like these things are stored in our body and our brain can just keep rewriting stories. And that doesn't mean the sensation's gone in our body.
You absolutely have that correct. And I like that you say, how long do we wait? It's a question that people ask a lot. Because, for example, I will have people where someone's passed away, right? And so they will say, well, should I just wait a couple months to see if I feel better before I come in? To which I always respond, well, wouldn't you rather feel better sooner than later? So you can see me as soon as you want to, because who wants to be stuck with the image of their, spouse who has passed away, or when they went in and found their father who hadn't returned a phone call for 3 days and saw him on the floor. Those are images that really torment people, but there's something about us as humans sometimes that we feel like, no, we need to sit with this for a while. We need to let this bother us for a while. To which I'm always like, no, you can still grieve and love and honor and do all those things without having to suffer in the process. And actually, you're going to be better off if you don't keep yourself suffering in the process, because you're not going to sleep. You're not going to take good care of yourself. You're going to look back on that time and it's going to be a blur. So let's not do that if we don't have to.
Yeah, the blur, right? The blur is a thing. I mean, it's fascinating to me where like sometimes because I climb these big mountains, right? And there's times where it was extreme, as you can imagine. This is a life-threatening pursuit in many cases and many times. And so I can recall intricate details from A to C, but sometimes the space in between, I can't tell you what happened. It was like my body was protecting myself from taking in all that information.
It totally was. Yes. And it doesn't remember those details. And what's fascinating about that too is when I work with people, and again, like you said before, it's not a lot of talking. This method, similar to EMDR, is you're watching it, we're processing out emotions, but we're not recounting the story. If people want to tell me the first session before we do the therapy, they can do that, but they don't have to. But the neat part about it is as we go through the protocol, once we've quote unquote desensitized them, and they watch that same bad movie again, they get details because you don't see those details initially. So when I'm doing it with people and we've watched the scene and then we go back and we look at it again and I'll say, was anything different? And they'll say, I saw the shirt. It was actually red. I saw these 5 other people that I don't remember being at the accident. And as soon as they say that, I'm like, yes, it's working. That means that the trauma is starting to fade.
Wow. Okay, so this is something that takes how many sessions typically?
So I say 1 to 3 to be careful, but if it's typical, like a car accident, 1 session. If it's a phobia, it's 1 session. If it's grief, it's 1 session. If it's complex PTSD, then I give myself the buffer of 1 to 3 with the event that we're working on because it was over such a long amount of time that sometimes what we find is we'll watch those 3 most intense memories you have, but once we wipe them out, stuff starts to bubble up because your body can only hold so much pain at a time, right? Like when your shoulders hurt, you feel it, but you hurt your knee, your shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. But as soon as your knee is healed, you feel your shoulder again. It's the same with bodily pain, right? Or emotional pain. So once we wipe out those things that have been playing in their mind the whole time, you'll start to have other stuff creep up. Or even if it was stuff they were aware of, I have to chunk it up so that we're not doing too much at one time.
Yeah, right. And then it stays, or is there things that they need to do to keep it integrated?
No, and that's what I love. So when you talked earlier about I have to revisit this piece, every time I climb again, that's what everybody says at the end of the session. They'll say, Laurel, do I have to come back and see you, for upkeep? And I'm like, nope, you're fine. Unless you have another episode similar to it. So for example, I had a woman who was mauled by a dog in her kitchen. And so we went through the whole thing and she had amazing relief. But then, like 2, 3 years later, she was mauled again.
What?
And she took in stray dogs a lot.
Oh my goodness, girl, get a new profession. Come on.
No, I know it was so awful for her, but everything came back when that happened. So that's where I would say, yes, we had to do a redo of sorts. I mean, the old stuff we didn't have to redo, but it's almost like she had a fragility to her. And I do notice that with people. What's super interesting is when somebody's had a trauma. So again, we'll go back to our car accident example. I can do this with someone who's had the car accident and they're fine. They drive for 4 years, no problem. But then I had this happen just last summer. A woman came in. She had watched a car accident on the highway. She had driven by as it was happening. And she came back into me and she said, Laurel, I think it wore off. And I was like, I thought in my head, it doesn't wear off. So I know that's not the case. But I was like, all right, let's explore what happened. So I said, what happened? And she was going through, a trial for her first accident. And she said, do you think that that triggered me? And I said, well, we'll see, but I still don't think it's supposed to wear off, even if that happened. And then as we got talking, I said, okay, so tell me when you started having those sensations again that you had initially. And she went back and she had totally forgot. And she said, I saw a car accident, a couple months ago. And I was like, oh, bingo. I said, now tell me. I said, when you think about what's happening in your body right now, what you're struggling with to drive again, I said, think about where you feel it. And now I want you to think about the car accident you saw. Think about that. Does it feel same or different? And she said, same. And I said, bingo. Now we know what we need to do. So what I had to do was process out the car accident she had seen because it was a re-traumatization of it. But then once we wiped that out, she was perfectly fine. So it's interesting. I noticed that people with certain types of traumas, you almost become fragile to recurrent ones that are similar to the initial one, but it doesn't mean the first wore off. It just means that you might be a little more fragile and get triggered by something similar.
Got it. No, I'm going to talk from a personal standpoint since we have you here. I have a hard time with sounds.
Okay, what type of sound?
Like, so when I'm in the kitchen and it's loud in the kitchen, like, I mean, or if I call somebody and it gets that loud static in the background or something like that, I mean, it can go 0 to like 180 that fast. And I have to leave the room to just like right? It just elevates me so high, but I don't have any sensation in my body. I just am very sensitive to sound.
Okay, so when has it been your whole life, or did that start at a certain point?
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you. I mean, it's been a long time.
That's very interesting. So if you were my client, I would say to you, I would do a couple things. I would say, I want you to think when you think about that sound happening, where do you feel it in your body? Like, so if you think about that, does it feel panic? Does it make your heart race? Can you,
Yeah, like I like want to curl up and like like you just like like you want to curl up in a ball or whatever and just I just have to it's interesting and I actually feel like my kids are like, "Mom, it's gotten worse. Like you're more sensitive to sound than you've ever been."
see, that's interesting to me because I would almost dare to say there's something that it's associating with that would possibly be going on. And so then I would say to you, think about the first time you felt that feeling you feel when you have that loud noise. If you can go back, and then sometimes if people can't, like in their mind here, their logical mind, I will move their eyes back and forth, and I'll say, ask your brain. I know it sounds super kooky, but I'll say, ask your brain, like, when did you feel this? And it's amazing. You start moving your eyes and you just focus on the sensation and say, when else in my life did I feel this? And people will go, oh my gosh, I just saw blank. And I haven't thought about that in years. So I would challenge you when that happens next, when you can get a hold of it, do that. Move your eyes and then say, when else did I feel this? Or even without moving your eyes, ask when it's so present. And if it ties back to something, that's the thing that would need to be pulled.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna hire you for a session when we're done with this thing. We'll figure it out. One of my kids had motor tics when they were younger, and we bought these things that you stuck on each one of their ears. That was like I feel like it was kind of like a tingly type sensation or something, so they could do their homework or do things and like just keep their system from up regulating.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a good idea. And things like that might work for you as well, right? If there's a lot going on when you have things like that happen that trigger you, because it could just be, has there been so much that's happened in your life, right, that your system is kind of jacked up once in a while. We'll have to talk further about that, Jenn.
Yes, in a private session, but today it's all about the listeners. Okay, so what, because I'm looking at like some of the information that I have on you. 21 was a significant year for you. And how did that send you onto your path there you are today? And share with the audience a little bit.
Yes. So I had a long list of very unhealthy relationships in my life up until I met my husband. Everybody was, I mean, I don't regret them, but they were pretty messy. And my father, when I was younger, he was the typical dad that was working all the time, came home stressed out, and wasn't very present. I'm a 1970s baby, so there was a lot of spanking that went on and then some. So all of that, I think, set.
And the cry it out method. I mean, that was what was preached to them. You let them cry it out and they'll figure it out, right?
Yes, completely all of that.
Choose to the core.
Yes. Yes. So that's kind of how I was raised. And I think some of that played into that. I was alone a lot through my teen years because I had siblings who had mental health issues that my parents were very much wrapped up in, which they had to be. But all that basically didn't turn out so well. So I was dating this really great guy, and he came to visit me in the summer. And my father noticed that I was kind of doing this to him. He's now my husband. But so my dad came up when he had left from the visit, and he took me for a walk around our neighborhood. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, "Honey, I've observed you this summer." And he said, "I've observed in a sense that you're more comfortable with the people who treat you poorly than this man who treats you like a queen and wants nothing but the best for you. And I see you pushing him away." And he said, "I can only think that I've had something to do with that." And so he said, "I want to say to you, I am so sorry." And he went down the list of things that had caused me pain and harm in my life up to that point and owned it all. And that released me. I will always say it was one of the most pivotal moments to have someone validate for me that yes, that this was as painful as I thought it was, and it should not have happened. And that's what I needed to hear. I needed to hear him say, the way that we responded to your behavior was not fair, and it wasn't correct, and it could have been handled so much better. So when he did that, I went back to college, and my boyfriend and I husband had broken up. And we both sat there, and we were stuck having to go to a weekend with his family on the lake in Michigan.
Where I'm from.
Yep. And we were like, well, we already committed to the weekend. Let's just stick it out and see how it goes. Because he was pretty fed up with me too. And we just healed. And after that weekend, we were great. And we were engaged like 6 months later.
Smitten with the mitten. I'm telling you guys, there's something special about that Michigander mitten.
Grand Haven.
Oh, even that. Yes, I like Holland is where I grew up, which is like 30 minutes from Grand Haven.
Yes, yes. So that was, yeah, so healing. So it really had such an impact on me because I have 3 children. And I really purposed since I had them to always say I'm sorry, to always own my mistakes all the time. And I have lovely children. And I have to think that there's a part that they've become very sensitive and human and understanding because I didn't have to be so proud to think that I had all the answers.
Right, right. What a gift. What a gift that your dad gave your whole line, right? I mean, not just you, but look at what you were able to do with that at the next level.
Absolutely. And it totally changed the way I saw my father. So up until that point in my life, if my father would hug me, I was pretty like stiff. And it didn't go away right away, but I can say now it is completely different. It was just so healing on so many levels.
Now, how often are you more sensitive, do you think, yourself now to like triggers and traumas and different things so that you clear them out of your own being on a regular basis so nothing accumulates? Or, are you the doctor's doctor? Like, do you take care of yourself like you take care of everybody else?
No, it's so bad. Like I'm like the cardiologist, right, who smokes and eats French fries. So I know I have things that I need to clear out, but the part is, right, who do I have to do it for me? Just like the heart surgeon who's like, well, who do I trust to do surgery on me? So I have trained two of my clinicians at my office in this method. So I can go to them. We've talked about trading with each other to clear ourselves out, but I'm actually going to a retreat in Costa Rica in October, and it's going to be for this. I'm basically going to lay it all out and be like, clean me up.
Yes, yes, I know of those retreats in Costa Rica. That's going to be amazing for you.
I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, for sure. Are you kidding me? Fantastic. All right. So, everybody listening in is thinking of all of their things that they want to clear out now that we're like, oh, I do this, or I thought this, or maybe this isn't quite healed. How do we find you, even because we can Zoom? So, that's huge. So, no matter where we are, we can Zoom and potentially work with you. And worst case scenario, we fly to where you are. So, give us details.
Okay. So people can find me on LinkedIn. They can connect with me. That's pretty easy. I have a website, laurelwiers.com. They can go there and they can get actually a trigger checklist and get my information on there. They can text the word reset. I like to call it a reset. Whenever we are dealing with triggers, you're kind of reset to who you were before that event happened. So they can text the word reset to 33777 and they'll get a trigger checklist. And on the bottom of that, it has all of my contact information as well. So those are some of the easiest ways to get in touch with me.
I love this. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom today and helping heal the world one human at a time.
Thank you so much for letting me share my journey. I really appreciate it, Jen.